Good afternoon. We will now call to order this Thursday, December 5th, 2024 special council meeting to order. First of all, we would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the unceded ancestral territory of the Silks Okanagan peoples and the Splatsine of the Secwepemc Nation. We'll start with an adoption of the agenda that the December 5th, 2024 special council meeting agenda be adopted. Do we have a mover? Councillor Valstar, seconder, Councillor Todd. Any questions? Having seen none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? This will be passed unanimously. And we will start off this evening with what you're all expecting. Presentation of reports from Mr. Terry Martins, our CFO. And I will just let everybody know that following the presentation, anybody that wishes to speak to the budget will have an opportunity. We'll have 5 minutes of speaking time. And with that being said, I will pass it over to Terry Martins. Thanks, Terry.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we'll start with a PowerPoint presentation. The information that we're going to be going over this afternoon, has been made available to the public this week on our website and on, I believe, on social media outlets as well. Okay. So the outline for the meeting, we'll follow these bullet points. We're going to be looking to see how the proposed budget supports the strategic plan. We're going to be looking at the budget on a consolidated basis, and then we'll look at the breakdown between our operational budget and what's been proposed for projects. For projects, we will have opportunity for each manager to briefly describe each of the projects that are on the proposed budget. We're going to be talking about reserve projections as well over the next 5 years, as well as one change requests that we're making for 2025. So for the strategic plan, the strategic plan we're working on is the same plan that council has adopted for the current term of council. The last update to that strategic plan happened early in 2024. So this financial plan in its proposed form is following the updates from that last update from the plan. So in regards to asset management, that's one of the components of the strategic plan. So with regard to the goal of planned infrastructure, the city is proposing to continue on with water, sewer, and storm modeling over the next several years, as well as determining a final funding strategy for the water reservoir and transmission main project. That's a combined project that's being proposed to take place over 2 years, 2025 and 26. And what we're looking at for planned infrastructure is finalizing the funding strategy for that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. With regard to green infrastructure, the city is planning on replacing certain fleet units utilizing electric or hybrid technology. So that will fall in line with that specific goal that council has issued. With regard to managed and planned assets, in 2025, the DCC bylaw is proposed to be developed, as well as the subdivision and servicing bylaw, as well as the 15-year capital plan. And that 15-year capital plan, the main goal of that plan is to prioritize infrastructure replacements over the next 15 years. So that will be pivotal in determining what infrastructure projects the city will be looking at. With regard to having adequate funding for assets and for reserves, we are proposing to continue with the established infrastructure tax levy in its current form. As well, building reserves is to also be augmented through a proposed rewrite of the existing reserve surplus policy. The existing policy is over 10 years old and needs an update. With regard to determining how surpluses get applied to certain reserve funds, how funds in reserves are used and for what purpose. So that rewrite is being proposed for this coming year to be done in-house. And we're stuck. There we go. So with regard to the goal for community engagement, the city is looking at developing resources for volunteer recognition. So these would be the many volunteers that help in various areas. In particular, for example, the Communities in Bloom volunteers, that would be a prime example at looking at how we as the city can recognize the efforts of those community members. With regard to environmental stewardship, the city did receive Fire Smart grant funding from the province, and that project is going to start and continue through 2025. There will be continued work on the wastewater recovery program. So this is in our sewer treatment. The city received several $1 million from the province not long ago, and that money is sitting waiting to be used for aspects of that wastewater recovery program. So that is a multi-year program that will utilize that grant funding. Community well-being, completion of the OCP bylaw that is almost finished, as well as the Comprehensive Armstrong Revitalization Initiative, the CARI completion. Rail to trail connection design is to take place over the next 2 years, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. Review of the Parks and Recreation governance model. As council is aware, right now we're in a transition year for 2025 as the township takes over management of that joint function. So 2025, both communities will be looking at a more long-term governance arrangement for that purpose. And finally, development of a heritage grants policy, with heritage grants being moved from an independent society that the city controlled to just part of the city. We will be looking at developing a policy for issuing heritage grants for buildings. For the final goal for a strategic plan for organizational resilience and sustainability, we received funding from UBCM from the province through UBCM for reconciliation engagement. So that initiative will be taking place in 2025, as well as phase 3, the final phase of the WorkSafe procedure updates. As well, for 2025, there are planned information technology infrastructure upgrades planned for the fire hall in order to bring the IT platform from the fire hall into our current network and security protocols that we have here for the rest of the city. Services. Very briefly, council is aware of these services, but I put the slide for the benefit of the public. These are the services that the city does provide. Most of these services are funded through a combination of taxation, user fees, government grants, and other revenue. However, there are 3 specific services, such as building inspection, treated water and wastewater, and solid waste collection that are solely funded through user fees. So they're 100% user paid. So there is no tax subsidization for those services. A little bit harder to read on this slide, but the next 2 slides are full of numbers. So if you don't like numbers, hang tight, your time's coming. So we'll just dwell on this for a brief moment here. So this is the consolidated proposed revenue for the next 5 years. So this revenue is not just operating, but it's also capital revenue, and hence why there's some fluctuations from year to year. With regard to city taxes, that is the category that obviously includes the city's own tax levies, but a very small component of that is for grants in lieu of taxes from senior levels of government for buildings that are exempt from taxation, as well as taxes, special taxes that utility companies pay the city. The next line is taxes levied for other governments. These are the agencies the city levies taxes on their behalf. We have to record this in our budget. So 3.5 million approximately for 2025. And then on the expense side, we would have the exact same amount because it's an in and out. We're the collection agency for that. And the reason why we have to show it in our budget is because many of these taxes, we have to determine the actual tax rates. we are given a dollar requisition and we have to determine the tax rates in order to levy those taxes. So that means those taxes have to be in the city's tax rate bylaw. And that's why we have to show it in the actual budget itself, even though it's an in and an out. Sale of services, that's the next line down. That is basically all of our user fees. That would be water fees, sewer fees, solid waste, our share of the recreation revenue fees, a wide variety of user fees there. So 4.4 million. License permits and fines, that would be in regards to business license and building permits and bylaw fines to a smaller degree. So a bit of a small category there. That's what that is. Interest and penalties. That would be interest on investments as well as penalties and interest on unpaid and overdue taxes and utilities. Cash contributions from developers are the amenity policy that we have for community amenities, where there is a development, developers are required to pay certain amounts of money to the city for future projects supported by growth. Government grants, this would be for all known grants that the city will receive in 2025. So this would be for operating projects, capital projects, as well as recurring grants that the city receives every year. So the reason why there's 1.377 million for 2025 is because that includes all of the grants that we know right now. Going forward, those are just grants that we receive annually that we know we are going to be receiving. As we move forward in the 5-year planning horizon, those numbers, of course, will likely increase because of one-time grants that become available and that we likely would be successful at. But for now, this is what we know at this point. Transfers from reserves and surplus, that fluctuates widely year over year based on the capital projects that are planned for that particular year. So again, that is mostly for projects, for funding for projects. Proceeds from borrowing, so new borrowing is being proposed for 2025 and 26 for water, and I will explain the details of that in a moment. So 23.5 million in consolidated revenue is being proposed for 2025. On the expense side, again, total expenses, 23.5 million for a balanced budget. General government is general administration and council at 770,000 for 2025. Taxes levied for other governments. Here's the other side of the taxes that we collect for other governments. Protective services would include RCMP, fire protection, as well as bylaw compliance and emergency management. Operation services, that is all of the outside services. So that would be public works, roads and drainage and fleet for the outside staff. And that is getting around $1 million per year for the operating of that area. Environmental health, that would be solid waste or garbage collection, as well as the city's portion of the cemetery, the joint cemetery function. Community development includes city planning, as well as community banners that you see around town. And one of the reasons that has dropped substantially from 2024 to 25 is because there were some one-time operating initiatives that were budgeted in 2024. We have now going forward in 2025, any kind of one-time initiatives, we are moving to the projects category so that we can start seeing some non-skewing of dollars from year to year. So what you're seeing there for community planning at 204,000, that is the normal year to year regular operating cost for that area, for that component. Recreation and cultural services, that would be our share of the joint parks and recreation function, as well as the neighborhood playgrounds, the tot lots in the community, as well as walking trail maintenance and funding for the museum. Water and sewer, self-explanatory. Those are the amounts for the operating component of those utilities. Principal and interest payments on debt for 2025, 367,000. That's proposed to increase based on the new borrowing that I was just talking about. And again, I'm going to describe that project a little bit more detail in a minute. So the project's in total over $10 million. And the reason why that is so large, it's not just because of capital projects, but it's because of carried over operating projects from 2024 that weren't finished yet. So going forward, you can see that in the future, it's smaller. Transfers to reserves, fairly stable from year to year. So we do have a budgeted amount going to various reserves in a systematic manner to prepare for the future and to fund future initiatives. So just talking about revenue for 2025, property taxation. The city has 3 tax levies for the money that the city keeps and doesn't have to forward to other agencies. So the general levy is the main tax levy, and it funds most services except water and sewer and solid waste and building inspection. It doesn't fund those. There is a planned 2% increase in this particular tax levy for 2025. That provides approximately $55,000 in additional revenue. The police levy is a separate levy on the tax notice, and it solely funds the RCMP contract. There is a planned increase of a flat $35,000 in this levy every year going forward in order to gradually meet the goal of self-sufficiency, so that the ultimate goal is that the total cost of the RCMP contract be completely funded solely from the police levy. Currently, right now, the city has to subsidize that cost out of the RCMP policing reserve that the city has. So that reserve is dropping. So the goal here is to slowly raise that levy so that we do not need to keep taking money from that reserve and that it can be self-sufficient. The infrastructure levy is the third levy on the tax notice. That levy solely funds transportation and drainage infrastructure renewal or replacement. So council last year in 2024 approved a 4.8% increase per year, and that is calculated based on the prior year general levy. So that would be a compounding cumulative increase year over year in order to provide a level of funding that would be sustainable for replacement of aging infrastructure. So this program just started recently, so we're in the early stages of this. So currently for 2025, if we continue on with that 4.8% increase, that will provide an additional $133,000 in funding specifically for infrastructure renewal. So that's a good news story there, and that we can look to that additional funding to be put towards infrastructure. The other highlight for revenue is a proposed rate increase for water. So with that project that I mentioned for the reservoir supply line for 2025 and 2026, the total estimated cost at this point is just under $10 million, and that is to span 2 years. The funding for that project is proposed to come jointly between the water reserve and borrowing. So for borrowing, in order to pay for the debt servicing costs going forward, staff is suggesting that there be a 3-year phase-in of rate increases so that it doesn't happen all in 1 year. Essentially, what would be required is approximately a 23% rate increase in order to afford the borrowing that's necessary for this project. But because this project can be spanned over 2 years, and with borrowing strategies put in place that would affect 3 fiscal years, a smoothing effect of a 6% rate increase in 2025 and 7% in 26 and another 7% in 27, the city would be able to afford the debt servicing for this initiative. And that would be done in a way that it would be a smoothing effect. So the impact to ratepayers is not all at once, but over 3 years. So that project and the borrowing associated, I should say, not the project, but the borrowing for that project is subject to elector approval. So according to the provincial legislation, either a referendum or an alternate approval process needs to be followed before borrowing can take place. Sewer rates, no change in rates are planned for 2025. Interest earnings is the other aspect that I wanted to raise to your attention. Because of falling interest rates, the budget for investment interest has to be reduced. Obviously, we're not seeing the returns that we did before. Estimating what it's going to be, it's a bit of a guess, but what's built into the budget for 2025 is approximately a $70,000 reduction in net investment earnings just because of falling interest rates. So that is definitely an impact on the budget. For government grants, that 1.377 million that was on the other page, this is the breakdown of what that represents. For the federal government, this is the Canada Community Building Fund, or formerly known as the gas tax. So we know what we're going to be receiving, and it will be $305,800 in 2025. For provincial grants, traffic fine revenue sharing, this is an annual grant the city receives, and it fluctuates from year over year, but that's the average, $20,000 per year. Small community funding, this is unconditional funding from the province to small communities. It averages around $545,000. The province has a rather complicated funding formula that they use to calculate the amount. So we won't know what that amount is until later in 2025. Wildfire resiliency. So this is the Fire Smart Communities grant that I mentioned before. $96,000 has been approved for the city for this project. $40,000 for Indigenous engagement. That has been approved. Capacity funding for housing and planning changes. This is money that was physically received in 2024, but is going to be used mostly in 2025 in order to fund the DCC bylaw and the subdivision servicing bylaw. $40,000 in remaining grant funds for the Complete Communities program for next year. As well as the Rural Economic Diversification, that is an ongoing grant. So the remaining $190,000 is proposed to be used in 2025 for the CARI initiative to complete it. On the expense side, wages. So the net cost of wages, net of recoveries from the township, is $2.56 million for 2025, and that is approximately 20% of the operating budget, not the total consolidated budget, but the operating budget. There is a provision for a 3% across the board increase in wages for 2025. So that provision is built in and being proposed. The current staff council structure, 7 elected officials. Inside staff is 12. Outside we have 7. And for fire department, the full contingent is 3 career staff and 34 on-call firefighters as of right now. So because the city oversees the fire department on behalf of both communities, the fire staff, including the on-call firefighters, are the legal employees of the city. So we show full gross costs of those staff, but then we show a recovery for the costs that the township reimburses us for. That is shown as an offset. So our RCMP contract for 2025 is $888,000. So that's around 7% of the operating budget. The city has a funded strength of 4 officers. That amount represents a 4.3% increase from 2024's contracted amount and is completely outside the control of the city or of council. We're at the mercy of RCMP on what those costs are. So that $888,000 not only includes the officers, but everything that goes with those officers. So that would be uniforms, vehicles, ammunition, weapons, administrative support, use of the federally owned building. All of that is included in the $888,000. Fire services, there is a 4.5% increase in the net costs, and that's due to increased wages, training budget, as well as some IT platform issues or improvements that I mentioned earlier. So Armstrong's total share of the net costs, $468,000 for the year for 2025. For operations, that represents 982,000. That is a decrease from 2024 due to one-time non-capital or operating projects being budgeted in the operating area in 2024. So 982 represents ongoing operational costs for transportation, drainage, for public works. So that's not water and sewer, but all of the other functions that they do. For solid waste collection, there is a slight decrease from 2024, and that's to reflect actuals. So the revenue and both for the revenue and expenses, that amount has slightly gone down. For cemetery, the Armstrong's share is 28,000 for the operation of the joint cemetery. So for community development, again, I mentioned there was a sharp decrease in 2025 due to several projects that were budgeted in that operating area. The joint parks and recreation function, the Armstrong share of the net operating costs, net of revenue, is 666,000 for the year. Water system operating costs, including the transfer to the water reserve, but excluding debt servicing, is approximately 1.6 million to operate the water system for 2025. It's a minimal increase from 2024. For sewer, it represents a little bit less, 1.58 million is the operating cost. A decrease from 2024, again, due to some consulting one-time projects that were budgeted in that area in 2024. I'm going to talk about debt a little bit. So the total debt owing on all of the city's loans at the end of 2024 will be 4.48 million. And that's comprised of 3 separate loans through the Municipal Finance Authority. The oldest one is for water improvements, where the city is paying roughly 29,000 in debt servicing per year. That will be paid off in 2028. So that's coming to an end. The fire hall renovation, a little more recent, 44,000 per year is it costs for the servicing there, paid off in 2035. And City Hall, 274,000 per year is the cost for debt servicing, and that will mature in 2053. The proposed new debt of 6.38 million for the water project, again, subject to elector approval, is proposed to cover 3 different borrowings. So actually 2 different borrowings. So the fall of 2025, as well as the fall of 2026. So the 2025 debt servicing would be minimal. It would be just accrued interest for the last part of the year. And then 2026 would be 168,700. And then 2027 onwards, about 392,000 per year. And that's based on current interest rates that are available to the city. And that interest rate right now is, I believe, 4.2% is the interest that we can obtain from borrowing. So borrowing does span 2 years, but enables a phased water rate increase over 3 fiscal years to ease the impact. Grants and aid for 2025. So this is a result of the grant application window that was open in the fall a couple of months ago, as per the city's policy. The policy indicates a funding formula to calculate the limit for these kinds of grants. And based on the proposed taxation for 2025, that calculated funding limit is $29,520. A total of 10 applications were received, and if all of them were approved, that would amount to $19,500. 7 applications fully qualify and meet all of the criteria according to the city's policy, and that totals $13,500. So I'll go over them briefly here. Of the 7, or all 10 are shown there on the table. It's a bit small, the print. The Armstrong Enderby Riding Club has requested $2,000. Staff is recommending that that one not be approved due to the fact that what is being requested is operational in nature. They're looking for help financially to pay their rent on their venue. And that doesn't qualify according to the policy. Armstrong Play School Association, they're looking for some capital funding for one-time building interior renovations. asking 2,000. They fully meet criteria. Staff is recommending that that one proceed. Armstrong and Area Community Resource Center Society. This is a new society that started up in 2024. They do not have financial information, so don't qualify, but again, they are a startup, so they wouldn't necessarily have that information yet. But they are looking for funding for venue space, so for rent, for 1 to 3 days per week. So according to policy, they wouldn't qualify. Armstrong Small Machine Medical Equipment Loan Cupboard, one-time capital purchase for a lightweight wheelchair, fully meets criteria. The Asparagus Community Theater, basement storage facility renovations, one-time funding, they qualify. Cam Jammers Car Club is not based in Armstrong, but what they're looking for is funding for their event, which is in the community, so it does qualify. Hogan Community Healthcare Society is looking for one-time funding for the replacement of medical equipment. They fully qualify. The Literacy Alliance of the Shuswap Society is not based in the community. It is more of a regional function. So it does not qualify. They're looking for operational funding for provision of books to children within the community. Another reason why staff is recommending that this one not be approved is because basically taxpayers are already paying for funding for the library, and we feel that this is a duplicated service. Boys and Girls Club, not based in Armstrong, but they do have a physical presence in the community. They're looking for operational funding for a specific program that is offered here in the community. So it does qualify, 1,500. And the Royal Canadian Legion is asking for one-time funding for building renovations for $2,000. And if council wants more information, I do have the full applications in case there are any questions about that. So we'll go through the projects. We'll start with the non-water and sewer projects. So I'm going to discuss just how these projects are proposed to be funded first, and then I will pass this on to the other managers to describe what these projects are. So for the tot lot improvements for Highland Park and the City Hall back landscaping, both of those projects would be funded from taxation. The DCC bylaw for 100,000 would be coming from provincial grant funding. The 15-year capital plan for 30,000 would be funded from gas tax reserve. Subdivision servicing bylaw for 40,000 would be funded from provincial funding, as well as the next two projects, next three, actually the next four, all the way down to Indigenous engagement. Those are all grant funded projects. Occupational health and safety plan for 10,000 would be coming from general prior year surplus reserve. The Parks and Recreation projects, this is Armstrong's share. So all of those projects are being proposed to be funded from the city's own Parks and Recreation reserve. The joint fire services, those projects are a combination of, most of them are fire truck fleet replacements, but there's also some fire hall related projects and IT projects. So it's a combination of taxation and the fire equipment reserve. The cemetery project is to be funded from the cemetery reserve. The rail trail connection would be funded from gas tax reserve, so that it continues from past years where it was funded from that source. The Jackson Pool Sugden infrastructure replacement project would be funded from a combination of the roads and drainage reserve, which comes from the infrastructure tax levy, as well as provincial funding from the Growing Communities Fund. So that was a large amount of money that the province paid to the city a couple of years ago. That money is sitting in reserves, so a large chunk of that is being used for that project. Storm drainage and condition assessment, that would be tax funded. Culvert replacement as well as tax funded. For equipment, That would be a combination of the equipment replacement reserve as well as provincial climate action funding, because a lot of the pieces of equipment would be utilizing hybrid or electric technologies. So we are able to use climate action funding to augment the cost of conventional replacements. So at this time, I'll go back up to the top of the list, and Brad, if you could start with the ones that you're dealing with there. It doesn't matter.
All right, I'll provide a quick overview of the proposed projects for 2025, and I'll be available to answer any questions as we go through. Highland Park Tot Lot, we have park space up in Highland Park that has been earmarked for improvements for a number of years, based upon expenses incurred for the Lions Park upgrades. We're proposing a similar structure for that parcel as well for 2024, and we'll go through design as if this is ultimately approved. City Hall landscaping is just to complete the rear of the building with some low maintenance minor treatments, and to wrap that up as phase 2. DCC bylaw, 15-year capital plan, and subdivision servicing bylaw are all kind of part and parcel. Our DCC bylaw will form priority projects moving forward and determines that developer cost contribution to those. The 15-year capital plan plays a pivotal point in that. It looks at all of our studies that we've conducted in recent years, from water, sanitary, storm, road condition, sidewalks, and puts priorities on those. Once we have those priorities put together, it puts together Class C cost estimates, which then help formulate the contribution projects for the DCC bylaw. The subdivision servicing bylaw plays into that in ensuring that our subdivision servicing requirements for developers and development is current to new legislation with duplexes and infill development, so that we have a clear and realistic picture that forms that not only that capital plan for council to understand cost implications moving forward, but a clear path forward and contribution amounts for developers as we have applications come forward. As we skip down to rail trail connection, we have proposed $40,000 in the 2025 budget to look at trailhead design and development, as well as just the detailed design on that connection from the terminus of the rail trail at Lansdowne to the substation at Armstrong into Mill Street. So that will do that design, and then we'll look forward to construction in 2022. Jackson Pool Sugden, this is infrastructure upgrades to that section of the roads there due to aging infrastructure. And this will bring in new water, sanitary, storm services, as well as updated roads, and deal with some aging infrastructure that is in that category 4, category 5 region for replacement. Storm drainage, CCTV and condition assessment. We recently completed our stormwater modeling, looking at our current capacity and future growth capacity. The storm drainage CCTV will actually do that camera inspection of our drainage infrastructure and help pinpoint those areas where we have the largest exposure for liability and risk due to aging infrastructure. A couple of key ones there that are pivotal. We have our 900 drainage culverts under the highway and under Askews and similar infrastructure along Smith that are key, that we don't let them get to that state of where they're not lineable or repairable. So this is a key of importance, and this will play into that 15-year capital plan because it'll help just determine that priority of where our biggest risk is and where our efforts are better focused to get the most bang for the dollars that we're putting forward. Culvert replacement on Schubert Road. We do have a culvert up there that has collapsed and is failing and is actually eroding a portion of the road. So this works will go through and replace that culvert, armor the both sides of the road appropriately, and then we'll look at resurfacing that top section in there before that causes any significant damage to the road structure. And we go down to plow truck replacement. This is a carry forward initiative from 2023. We have issued a requisition for a new plow truck. Supply chain still continues to be a significant challenge in large equipment. So we will be looking at delivery hopefully by third quarter 2024, or sorry, 2025 for that piece of equipment. It's unfortunately, there's not one sitting around that we can put into service for this winter. Pickup truck replacements, 2 of our half-ton trucks, looking at the hybrid and electric technology, as Terry had mentioned. Jackson Pool Sugden, there's a contribution for the water line replacement, which includes upsizing for future demands. New storage reservoir. This is the addition of 3,200 cubic meter capacity up at our water treatment plant. This provides 2 full benefits to the community. The one most important one is meeting our fire flow demands. So that is the ability to have uninterrupted water service in the event that we have a fire in the community that is being actioned by the fire department without losing our services to our residents. And then just increasing our treated water storage capacity. Transmission main upgrades. So this is replacement of aging infrastructure from our water reservoir through our right-of-ways down to Rosedale East. This is our main supply line to the community. This is an upsize and replacement of that aging infrastructure. This was identified as priority in 2011. We are still on borrowed time on this project, and that project comes in at just $5,675,000. Or sorry, yeah, and actually we have that for a 2026 project. So that is forming part of that combined borrowing that Terry had mentioned earlier. The sewer portion of the Jackson Pool Sugden upgrades, $589,000. We are proposing to run a pilot program at our sewage treatment facilities to look at facility upgrades and some new technology. We have the $700,000 in there to run that pilot program, as well as prepare the site for future sanitary upgrades as part of the grant funding that we received from the province. And this does fit in with the North Okanagan Wastewater Recovery Project and looking at our sanitary treatment options for the community in the region. ADR improvements. This is again a pump replacement for our sewage treatment plant, and that's ongoing asset replacement there. The relining of the VCT, so that's our cure in place pipelining for our sanitary lines. We did just shy of 900 meters this year. We're looking at being probably in around that 650 to 700 meters this year. And that's taking our current pipes in the community that are in good enough shape and are have the ability to be lined with the cure in place pipeliner to get that extended life out of those lines without having to do open excavation. And that's an ongoing program. And this 2024 is year 1 of that. And that is the majority of the projects. Actually, yeah. So that is the highlights on those.
Okay, thank you. I should mention to council that the 700,000 for the sewer treatment upgrades and pilot project include the 615,000 that council has already wouldn't approved or approved in principle, I guess, for the pilot project. And right now in the budget, that is being funded out of the sewer reserve. But there is a possibility that existing grant funding could be used for that. And until we find that out, it would have to be funded by reserve. But if it can be funded by the grant, then potentially the cell 3 desludging of 650,000 could be moved to 2025 to use reserve funds. The reason why the moving around from year to year is just it had to be done that way based on current reserve levels to be able to pay for these projects. So as well, going back, in the transportation and drainage section, there are two over the next 5 years that have been earmarked at this point in time. So the Jackson Pool Subden and the Pleasant Valley Boulevard North are the only two at this point in time. And that's intentional because we're waiting to see what the 15-year capital plan, which is happening in 2025, results in priority for other areas. So essentially, a year from now, we will have that plan completed and we'll be able to budget specifically for 5-year planning horizon for the different areas. So we thought that for now, just the two would be included in the 5-year plan until we see the outcome of that capital plan. So the next projects that need some descriptions, Lori, thanks.
Thank you, Terry. So the two projects that I have to talk about, I think we're fairly familiar with, the Comprehensive Armstrong Revitalization Project. So as we know, this project is just nearing the finish line, which is very exciting. The design concepts for the whole area that we're looking at have been endorsed, and now we're looking at detailed design and engineering for Pleasant Valley Boulevard North. We're also looking at diving into the truck route planning and doing a bit of a wayfinding program for the community using the remainder of the grant funds in 2025. So everything for that grant needs to be wrapped up by March 31st. So that is our goal, to get everything wrapped up and the reporting in. The Complete Communities project, that is also a grant funded project that we've been using information to feed into and double check some of the assumptions we made in the official community plan. It's basically an exercise that analyzes the whole community with GIS mapping. We've taken all of the outcomes from the storm, sewer, water, road, sidewalk, all those assessments, and we put them in, and we're able to see in the GIS data kind of where needs focused most of all. That project will be coming back in the new year for council to have a look at some of the outcomes, and should be wrapping up in the first quarter, hopefully.
Thank you. For the next three projects, Warren can provide some explanations.
So I will note that the first two projects, both the Fire Smart project and the Indigenous Engagement, are grant funded programs. So under our Fire Smart program, we did receive grant funding, the full amount of $96,000 that is to go towards both staffing as well as also a community wildfire risk assessment. The community wildfire risk assessment takes approximately about $32,000 of that $96,000 and invested in looking at historical records and documentation of what has been former risks and occurrences within our community, as well as also developing what future risks potentially could be for our community. There will be development of mapping, and there'll be direction given on where we should be focusing our efforts to mitigate or eliminate projected risks that could occur within our community. As I did mention, a portion of that is directed towards staffing. We're anticipating that we'll be hiring staffing early spring and having those that individual carry over into through till September. The main focus of that individual's programming will be to look at public education, working with the contractor to develop the community wildfire resiliency plan, as well as also doing some training for staff and for our community, and looking at long-term opportunities within our Fire Smart program and for future grant opportunities. In addition, a portion of the funding that we did receive can be put towards 20% of other tasks, which could be, we had opportunities to look at having that individual work within our fire department or other opportunities within emergency management. We went the direction of looking at emergency management. With the changes that occurred this past year or a year and a half ago now, with the Emergency Program Act, there's significant changes that we need to do to update our plan. So we're hoping this individual will be able to outline what those changes may be and potentially be able to provide some amendments to bring that program forward for us. The Indigenous engagement funding of $40,000, that was funding that we received last year. We are now taking a regional approach. So we are looking at, as far as the Central Okanagan Regional District as well, who just came on board today by the looks of it, that are interested in working within the valley as a whole, as we're dealing with a number and working with a number of the Indigenous communities within the valley. So instead of creating duplication, creating additional works for everyone, we are looking at combining our efforts, and those will be focusing on looking at what opportunities we have within our own communities to support each other, particularly when it comes to emergency social services, supporting staff within EOCs, looking at training opportunities, but also overall opening up communication and looking at to see what other opportunities are out there. The province has come back and kind of put a little bit of a nugget out on the side for us that if we can use that funding up, there'll be additional funding coming forward for 2025, 2026. So that is great to be able to know that there is potential funding coming towards us again. And then lastly is the $10,000 for the health and safety plan. And that is to look at and develop safe work practices for all of the equipment that we use, for all of the variety of tasks that we perform, to ensure that our staff are fully aware of how equipment can and should be operated, to look at ways that we can mitigate incidents from occurring, and for eventually also looking at long-term opportunities to potentially even look at equipment that may be higher risk that could eventually be replaced in the long-term future.
Thank you. So for the recreation projects, I can address those. So for 2025, this is the joint projects for the joint recreation function. For 2025, the projects that are earmarked are replacing the sprinkler system at the Agriplex, as well as purchasing a used loader, front-end loader, and replacing the pool perimeter grates around the swimming pool. So those three projects for 2025, and Armstrong's share of that would be $133,750. For 2026, those projects include a roof replacement for the horticultural building, a replacement of equipment in the gym at the Hassan Arena, replacement of the score clock at Hassan Arena, resurfacing the floor at Centennial Arena, or Centennial Hall, I should say, drainage and paving at the fairgrounds, and installing a new awning at the spray park and pool. So Armstrong's share of all of those projects combined, $83,500 for 2026. For 2027, what is being planned, a new air conditioning unit for the hall side of Centennial Building, court replacement at Memorial Park, and cameras for the Sunbelt Arena, Hassan Arena, and Centennial Hall. So those three projects together, $87,500 is Armstrong's share. 2028, what is being planned is to replace the pool liner and to replace the control unit for the sound system at the main arena. So the combined effect of that, $175,000. And finally, for 2029, upgrading the pool chemical room ventilation, as well as replacing the top seal on the floor at Hassan Arena. So the cost there, $45,000 for Armstrong taxpayers. So again, all of those projects are being funded from the city's own Parks and Recreation Reserve. For the joint fire function, I'll briefly describe those projects. For 2025, there is a water tender that is scheduled to be replaced, as well as the roof on the fire hall is to be replaced. That was originally budgeted for 2024, but that project did not happen, so it's being carried over to 2025. As well as one-time purchase of computers and computer tablets at the fire hall in conjunction with the IT platform changes that I talked about before. So the city's share of all of those combined amount to 233,880. No projects for 2026, but for 2027, what is being planned is the purchase of a wildland fire response truck. That would be 101,400 for Armstrong's share. 2028 is a scheduled engine number 1 replacement. Total cost 1.325 million. Armstrong's share 536,000. For 2029, just some one-time IT replacements, small purchase, but again, one-time project. For cemetery, the only project over the 5-year planning horizon is the construction of a new columbarium, but the township has advised that they will only do that project once the existing columbarium is full. So they, it's earmarked right now and in place, but may not happen unless that is filled up first. Now we'll talk about reserves. We're almost through. So with this slide, it's very busy, my apologies, but I did want to put everything on one page so that you can have a fulsome look to the city's reserves. So the city has a number of reserve funds and reserve accounts for specific purposes. I won't go through all of these in detail, but what I did want to say is the 2024 year-end balances, those represent the current uncommitted available amounts in those reserves right now. So those numbers could increase depending on what kind of surplus we will see at the end of 2024. So if there are surpluses, if there is a surplus, we could be coming to council with a recommendation to do a one-time transfer to reserves, and those numbers would go up accordingly. So assuming that there's no surplus, the numbers reflect that assumption. So from 2025 to 29, those are the projected year-end balances for each reserve in each of those years, with all of the funding for projects and initiatives in place that we just went over. So these are realistic numbers. When we were planning the timing of projects, we wanted to ensure that obviously we could fund these projects appropriately and that nothing was in the negative. But as you can see that with the current timing and types of projects that are being planned, some of these reserves are dipping down substantially and then picking up again. So definitely lots of ebbs and flows as we carry on through the next 5-year planning horizon. And again, once the 15-year capital plan is completed and specific road and drainage projects are budgeted in the next 5 years, the roads and drainage reserve at the top there would go down. So because there are no projects for 27, 28, or 29, that's why those numbers are getting up to over $3 million by 2029. But realistically, a year from now, we will have other projects that we can budget for that utilize those funds. So those are the available balances and projected balances. So what does this mean for the average home and property? So everything in the budget for 2025 is reflected here with regard to taxation. So in 2024, the average residential property was valued at $589,000 and change. So the 3 city tax levies are listed there with the tax rate that was in effect for those levies in 2024, as well as what the calculated amount would be for that assessed value. So $1,316.51 for the average house in 2024. So if the proposed tax increases were approved, this is what it theoretically would look like for the average house. Again, we don't know what the 2025 assessments are. It's too early to tell. We won't know that until January. So again, we're assuming that, well, this is based on average. So for the projected tax levies for 2025, you can see the breakdown there, and the total would be $1,392.78. So this would be an increase of $76.27 or 5.8%. So breaking it down monthly would be $6.36 per month. You can see that of that $76 increase, more than half of it is earmarked for the infrastructure levy, and that is that 4.8% annual increase every year to bolster the reserves so that we can fund infrastructure replacements. Again, we're in the early stages of that program, so it's going to take a number of years to build it to a certain amount where we can systematically tackle a lot of the infrastructure needs. For the average business, 2024, the average assessment for a business property was $671,000 and change. So the tax levy was $4,903. That would go up to $5,187. So an increase of $284 approximately for the year. Again, 5.8%. Monthly increase would be $23.66. And finally, this is the last slide in the presentation. Staff only has the one change request for 2025. So this initiative is not currently in the proposed financial plan. Staff is separating this just for the purpose that what is being proposed is creating two in-house positions for summer student labor. So essentially for 4 months every year, having post-secondary students on the payroll doing contracted boulevard landscaping. So this would be in place of the existing budget that we have for contracted boulevard landscaping. So right now, approximately $20,000 is in the budget right now for slightly less than 300 hours of contracted landscaping. Whereas 29,300 would be able to pay for 2 summer students for a total of 1,440 hours per year. So the incremental increase in cost of $9,300 would provide a huge efficiency gain, and the impact of that would be 0.33 or 1/3% tax increase. So that would be $2.84 per year for the average home. So this is going to be a separate recommendation because this currently is not in the budget right now. Because it would be a tax-funded new positions, the decision was made to show this as a change request, as a separate request. And that's it for the presentation.
Thanks, Terry. I think I'll open the floor up to council for any questions they have to start with, and then we'll move on to our guest. Anybody at the table have any comments or questions they'd like to ask with Terry? Seeing none here, Council Nietzsche, you're all good?
Sorry, Your Worship, I just having trouble hearing. Is this the point in time where council wants to have their opportunity to ask questions from staff, or are you waiting for the gallery?
No, we're going to have council go ahead and do that first. Now is the time.
Okay.
I got Councillor Valstar.
Did no other councilors have any questions? I have a few.
Yeah, we'll go with Councillor Valstar here first, and then we'll bring you on.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So is there any opportunity to put PV Boulevard next year instead of 2026?
I'll let Mr. Ackerman address that.
Through your worship, we are going through our process with PV Boulevard. This has been going on for quite some time. Landing on the conceptual plans has taken a little bit of time, and as a result, that has delayed some of the design for the project. At this point, the consultants are looking at a target of spring of 2025 to have a detailed design. With that detailed design will come a opinion of probable cost. And once that is in place, we would then look to have a tender-ready package. With the timing of this, that does not put this project in as a viable project for 2025, just due to construction window in order to have this completed within that construction window. The thing that further adds to the complexity of the project is findings from the geotechnical study. There is a significant organic layer underneath PV North Boulevard that is leading to that road structure failure. It will be an intensive rehabilitation for that. So that is going to take a little bit of additional time to look at the magnitude to correct that deficiency. And it is significant. So it will have an impact. There is also the requirement of review by CN Rail and Transport Canada for any works in around those intersections at Mill and PV, as well as Okanagan, which adds some further review time there as well. Staff knows the priority of the project from the public's perspective as well as council's perspective, and to be honest, with staff as well, but time does prevent that as being a viable project. But we continue to look to options, but at this point, it does not seem to be feasible for 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Ackerman. Councilor Drapla?
Yeah, just a follow up to that, Brad. So when would that work actually take place then? Because I know looks like it's budgeted for 2026, but by hearing what you're just saying, it doesn't sound like the work would actually get completed in 2026.
The intent is to have that tender-ready package completed in 2025 and go out to market at the end of 2025 for a start on the project as soon as conditions permit in 2026. The construction window for the project would anticipate it to be from April through until early October to finish that work. And the main outstanding thing is that opinion of probable cost based on the detailed design. We don't have that as of yet. We have $2.5 million earmarked for 2026, but until we have that OPC, we don't really know what that project is going to cost. Based upon what the geotechnical report is indicating, I would anticipate that project would likely come in closer to the $5 million mark, just due to the extent of work that's going to be required.
Councilor Fowler?
Thank you. So I think Laurie had mentioned that the detailed design and engineering is supposed to be completed in the first quarter. Is that the hope?
Yeah, we did have a discussion with the consultants today, and that is the intended target to have that done.
So I understand some of the operational concerns, but it's so disappointing that this isn't going to get started, at least started this year. I have a few questions about that. So only going back to 2022 and 23, I believe, we agreed to not do any road work in Armstrong because the Pleasant Valley Boulevard would take 2 years expenses to get it all done. So we agreed we'd do it all in one. 2023, it was going to get done. And then 2024, we all agreed, and it made sense to hold off because we didn't want to go ahead and start the project and then find that we were digging something up or taking walls down or other infrastructure. So it made sense. So to not have it going ahead in 2025 is a real concern for me. I think there's a couple of things to think about from my point of view, and one is when that road gets done, there's going to be a lot of concerns with businesses and working around, and I know our consultants the last few years have been excellent working with residences. I'm wondering, are we going to go one full year? When kind of dates would be the dates that we would be talking to the businesses about, knowing what the businesses are on that street and what would be held up, for instance, garden season, for an example. And with this extra work that you're concerned about for the geotechnical study, are there not some things we can get started on there and at least start making an effort to get some work going? I know we don't want to get the road all dug up and have it like that for 2 years, but is there any opportunity to stage it to just get started?
Thanks for the comments and the questions, Councillor Fowler. That work will be underway next year. There is multiple steps to that process. And again, that key piece of information that we need is that detailed design. You know, the process to get to that concept where we are now with the parking and kind of the reiterations has definitely delayed things. But as we have that detailed design, opinion of probable cost, we can then look to phase that and have that consultation with the community on when we start construction in 2026, how we can minimize that impact to the community and to businesses to be able to kind of phase that work to where there's a minimal impact to businesses and we can kind of keep some continuity in there. It is going to be an intrusive project, no doubt about it. So, you know, taking that time in 2025 to work with our business community to have a plan that everyone understands and can appreciate on how we will deliver this project with minimal impact in the ultimate goal of having that showpiece downtown portion for the community moving forward. So even though there may not be equipment on the ground and excavations next year, there is a lot of legwork to be done in order to get to that phase. And that is the important kind of pre-work that will help make a project go smooth. We have had discussions with the geotechnical engineer and the consultants on additional options for some of the road works and the geotechnical issues. But they do come with significant risk of, as long as there is that level and that depth of organic layer in there, you can look at some alternative engineering practices to buy you some additional time, but it's short time. And, you know, we're at that point where the level of organics in there does require a more intensive rework of the road. And so we just need to have that plan in place and have that full understanding before getting too far into it.
In Laurie's presentation, she mentioned the extra work that would be involved for organizing a truck route, which is also part of the carry downtown to get the trucks off there, and also the wayfinding. Is there not some of those things that could get done? Is the truck route not something that we could be working on and have that in place before we do that construction? Are there not something, I'm trying to pick some things we can get moving on here, like physical work.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Fowler. We will be at least developing the plan for the truck route and the wayfinding strategy before the end of the grant. So those both have to be completed by March 31st. And then council can consider what those outcomes are and if there are any pieces that we can get started. Both of them will have reached farther than the Kerry project. So there may be places around town that too, they might make sense to start with signage rather than putting it somewhere where we might remove it later. Right. So those are the things that we'll have to consider when we get the outcome of those.
So can you give us some ideas of what the instituting a truck route will be? What are some of the expenses? Is it mostly just the wayfinding?
So for the truck route planning is just identifying access points to our community for truck traffic, given our industrial nature with the pellet plant, the industrial components downtown, how we can get trucks in and out of the community, looking at the pathways that accommodate that level of traffic, having that consultation with the industrial community on their needs to have that understanding as we do plan that truck route. The one thing that is very clear is that the truck traffic in our community is having a significant impact on our road network. So as we look at our 15-year capital plan and infrastructure upgrades, we can identify those routes and build those routes accordingly, engineer them to handle that level of traffic. So we have that longevity as we make that investment to upgrade our road infrastructure, as well as ensuring that, we're not causing unnecessary deterioration on our other streets that aren't designed for truck traffic. So it's anticipated that it will be probably a 3-month process to kind of look at routes to move truck traffic through the community, do that engagement with the industrial partners and commercial businesses in town to understand the needs, and then come up with a plan for council's review, and then build that into our 15-year capital plan.
Yeah, I would just add to that there will be it won't be just a exercise. When we identify the truck routes, there may be some infrastructure changes that are required to allow the trucks turning movements at the alternate locations. So it won't be just signage. There may be some need for actual infrastructure upgrades as well. Let's wait and see what the outcome is.
Recommendations would form part of that 15-year capital plan.
Thanks for your patience, Councilor Leachy. I can let you jump in here.
Yeah, thank you. A couple quick questions, one for Terry and one for Brad. Terry, can you just advise me what the Growing Communities Fund reserve was in 2023 and what the increase was in 2024? I know it's 2.416 million, but what was it in 2023? Like, how much interest did we accrue in that fund?
Thank you, Councillor Nietzsche. I will have to look that up. I will need a few moments to look that up. So if you wouldn't mind, we can carry on to the next one, and I can.
That's fine. Thank you. So, my second question is, Brad, I understand the rationale for prioritizing Jackson Pool Sugden over PV North. I understand the complexities around getting final design and getting that all completed. My question is related to the $2.5 million placeholder that's in 2025. And given the information you provided tonight, and that is probably an insufficient placeholder, would it be wise for us to strategically think about, from a financial perspective, perhaps utilizing that Growing Communities Fund by perhaps delaying Jackson Pool Sugden to 2027 and retaining that funding with interest for completion in 2026? Because it's quite obvious what we're doing is we're using about 50% of the funding for one project in 2025 and 50% in 2026. And given the uncertainty around that budgeting number for 2025 for PV North, I'm just wondering if we could lessen the impact. I'm certain that staff would be working hard to look for infrastructure grants that may be coming from the province to augment one or both of those projects, particularly the downtown revite project. But I'm just wondering if it's for consideration, if something that we've thought about financially, kind of delaying a project so that we could use the funds for the downtown project. And I have a second question, but it's on a different related matter.
Yeah, so thanks for the comments, Councilor Nietzsche. That is something that we are looking at. We do have some significant infrastructure needs moving forward, and reserves that are going to be challenged to help deal with those. So all of us as a team are kind of looking at different ways that we can deliver on these projects and what makes the most sense kind of in this in between before we have that fully developed 15-year capital plan. We still have some sanitary requirements on Jackson. If we were to push that project out, that would need to be addressed in the short term as kind of a stopgap measure. But we can look at options if there's a desire from council's perspective to delay one project in favor of another, recognizing that we do have, let's face it, some limited capacity right now funding wise. So we can look at options.
Councillor Drapla.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Nietzsche. I was going to say exactly the same thing with the funding and the 2.5 million. It's a really important project for us, and looking at cost increases this year and even projected ones for the next 2 years after this makes me concerned that if we don't delay that, the Jackson Pool Sugden project, that we're going to be sitting here next year at this time looking at PV North, but also a significant tax increase to complete that project after it's gone to tender and we know the exact cost. So that makes me more comfortable if we delay that project, even if we have to spend some money to kind of get us by. I think we're going to have to start looking at that as a solution for a few of our infrastructure projects, going like, what do we actually need to do, and what can we do to get by to push things into the future while we can kind of get things going. I know things get more expensive as years go on, but I think council has some priorities in those projects, and PV North is one that I think we all agree on here as being a priority for next or as soon as possible.
Thank you. Brad?
Yeah, through the mayor, we do have an opportunity to look at potentially phasing Jackson Pool Sugden as well, and phasing a portion of PV North, and maybe trying to spread both projects over a little bit longer time. So we can definitely look at that. We are significantly challenged just with deferrals, and it has gotten us into this challenge of trying to fund these infrastructure needs. And Councillor Drapla, you've kind of hit the nail on the head that there is cost increases with deferrals, and I think we're all well aware of that, but it's just, we just need to find a creative way to kind of choreograph these projects to move ahead and not fall even farther behind, because we're in a position right now where we can still control some of the projects on our terms. My concern is that we will have a catastrophic failure in some of our infrastructure, and we're then now reactive on those. So we'll work to try and come up with some alternatives to try and advance things forward and check a number of the boxes. But we got to start taking a bite out of that deferred infrastructure and moving it forward.
Councillor Fowler?
Yeah, thanks for everyone's comments. I think you can tell my strategic priority would be PV Road, and I feel it is a catastrophic failure. I think that every time I drive down there, I'm quite thankful that I didn't get caught in one of those holes somewhere and never to be seen. I really do think that's a priority for our community, for our residents, for council, and whatever we need to do to get that done. And I agree with Councillor Drapla that, and Councillor Nietzsche as well, that with the impending rising costs, 2.5 isn't going to do that road, especially with the extra geotechnical that we're concerned with now. And we've been through this game before where we have put 2 years' money aside to do that road, and it got put aside. And I don't know what happened to the money, but here we are like 4 years later, still trying to do it and potentially getting pushed aside because we don't have money to do it. So I'll stop there. But that's my priority, is to get PV Road done.
Councillor Belster?
Thank you very much. On the topic of roads, A year ago yesterday, we received a report about our road condition assessment. We had 7 roads that needed help within 5 years, and an additional 23 roads that needed help within 10 years. So that's 30 roads total that need help as soon as possible. And I imagine that's what the 15-year capital plan is. I imagine, I don't know what, I think that's what you guys were trying to say that is. But just for me, I know we have to redo the infrastructure and when we do some of this stuff. But I'm really struggling with it because we don't have to reinvent every road every time we do it. Right? A lot of the roads aren't terribly laid out. They just need some care and maintenance and repaving in some instances, right? Like it's just, we've got like 7 of them and we're addressing one of them, and we're addressing Sugden or whatever, which is listed in the 10-year one sooner than later. Is that what the 15-year capital plan is?
Yeah, to Councillor Valsar, that is looking at incorporating all the findings from those studies to look at the biggest priorities. And, for example, you'll take a road like, say, Jarvis, and pavement condition assessment ranks as poor. Water line is from 1920, it's ductile. Sanitary is asbestos concrete, poor condition, under capacity. So it just checks those priorities on those projects. And then we can then put the cost estimate onto it to say, okay, to go through and address the road and the required upgrades, this is the best use of that money versus just looking at that surface treatment. We are looking at opportunities where with our cure in place pipelining and those technologies where we don't have to do open excavation, to where we can go in and do a mill and repave to address some of the low hanging fruit. And there is opportunities, by example, MOTI has reached out. They are planning on paving between Armstrong and Enderby in 2025, and are reaching out to municipalities to see if there is economies of scale to take advantage of the MOB and DMOB and sharing paving. So we are looking at those opportunities to maximize our available dollars and start looking at dealing with that infrastructure that we can action right now in advance of having to do some of that underground works. But you can appreciate it. It's kind of a complex scenario to put together, and that's what that 15-year capital plan will look and say, okay, here's your biggest risk, here's the biggest opportunities, and here's the costs, so we can make those informed decisions. That will be a key component for us moving forward. But your comments and that are very valid. We do have a lot of infrastructure that needs updating.
I'm going to go back to Councillor Nietzsche.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to comment on one thing that Brad said earlier. I would not be supportive of a phased approach to PV North. This is a situation where we need to rip the Band-Aid off and deal with the construction on that within that window, and not have business interruption happening down there over multiple construction periods. So I think that once we get going on that project, it needs to be start to finish and not have a prolonged agony down there. And we need to respect the fact that the businesses need to operate down there. My second question is related to the request for staffing increase for the doing the boulevard maintenance and landscaping maintenance. And I just want a question for staff and Terry and Brad. The $9,300, or I think an increase, is that net of any potential grant funding that we could apply for? And what I'm referring to is the Canadian Recreation and Park Association has grant funding available for these type of specific positions. And I'm just wondering if you're presenting worst case scenario where you didn't get a grant, or is it the intention to apply for that grant funding to fund those positions?
Thank you, Councillor Nitchie. The incremental cost increase of 9,300 is indeed the worst case scenario. So yes, you are correct. There are potential sources of grant funding we could obtain. So I purposely did not include any provision for grants that are speculative at this time. So it's something we'll be looking into if this is approved. And if I may answer your other question, Councillor, with regard to the Growing Communities Fund, the funds were originally received in 2023, and it was $2,450,000 was received. There was approximately $30,000 in interest credited against that reserve in 2023. Probably a little bit less than that for 2024, even though we're a full year, but it's lower interest rates. There was a small use of that funding in 2023. So essentially, it's $2,416,000 that is kind of our balance starting point at this point in time. How that funding is being used over the next 2 years is for the Jackson Pool Sugden project, $1,100,000 from the Growing Communities funding. And then in 2026, $1,390,000, or the remaining funding from that going to the PV North, and then the fund would be gone.
And Councillor Todd.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't want to beat this to death, but when we all sat at that all candidates meeting in 2022, the priority from everybody was PV North. Everybody said, let's get that done. Now we're 2 years down the road, and I really don't want to be sitting at the all candidates meeting in 2026 trying to explain why we haven't got the road done. So that's just, to me, like I said, I don't want to beat it to death, but if we get held up because CN doesn't like something, is that going to add another 6 months to everything? Are we going to have this conversation in 3 years again? Or can we be somewhat sure that this will be accomplished by October of 2026?
Through to Councillor Todd, we are having those conversations with CN through the design, so we have that understanding, so it doesn't get held up unnecessarily. So I'm confident that as we identify issues and look at the conceptuals, we've had several meetings with CN to talk about the proposed conceptuals that have been taking place over the course of the last year to get their feedback on it and understand what their requirements are. So I think we're confident that with the feedback we're getting from them and making revisions, that once the detailed design is done, it will address those concerns, and it won't be a design that's kicked back to us saying that doesn't work for CN or that doesn't work for Transport Canada. So that will continue to take place in the early part of 2025 to ensure that when that detailed design and tender ready package is done, it goes out to contractors to bid on, and they can price accordingly and plan accordingly to deliver a project. So we aren't sitting here in 2026 going, we're not there yet. So that's the legwork that goes in behind the scenes that takes a lot of time, and let's be honest, it's taken us a long time to get to where we're at with the conceptuals. It's a big project and an important project to the community. We've seen that in kind of the community's involvement and input. So that's important to ensure that what is constructed meets the needs of the community. And I think we're on that right path. It's just, unfortunately, it's a big project and takes time to deliver it properly.
Great. I'm not trying to cast aspersion on anybody at all. It's just going to be difficult for us as council to explain to the citizenry why we're doing Sugden and we're not doing PV North. So we're going to have to come up with some rationale that is palatable to the citizens of Armstrong. So that's just, one of those things we have to deal with, I'm sure. Thank you.
Counselor Weiner?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a comment first is that, Brad, there is an incredible amount of high priority work here that you're doing. And just kudos to the amount of work that you're taking on and how important all this water sewer is absolutely critical to our community. And yeah, this kudos to you and the amount of work that you're taking on here. The question that I have is, can you paint the picture, the risk to me of say delaying Jackson and Pool? So I see water and sewer. I don't know what's happening under the road. I don't have a good picture of the risk of maybe delaying that or saving the dollars for one project for another. Can you help me understand that a bit better?
Yeah, so Jackson Pool, Sugden, we do have some category 4, category 5 sanitary issues there that require open point excavation to remediate. It's been part of the ongoing work that's been underway from our condition assessment for our sanitary system. So that has kind of elevated the project up the scale there. Because it is open point excavation, it is a deep sanitary line in that location. It is disruptive. We have done some additional upgrading work in behind the lagoons, so this would tie that together. The other opportunity that presents itself with the work in this area is the lands that is designated for housing at the corner of Pool and Sugden, which has been a council priority in the past. This does help update that infrastructure to help advance that project, to have the utilities and the infrastructure there to support it. So there's competing priorities there. So that is something to give some consideration to. But we can look to do a point repair to the existing sanitary infrastructure that will buy us some additional time. If council wishes to defer that project down the road and potentially look at pursuing grants with some of the housing initiatives to look at having those opportunities for those lands to come online for attainable housing in the community. So there is that competing kind of interest there. That's why some of the rationale behind Jackson Pool, Sugden.
Counselor Drapala?
Thank you. I think it is, like it's said before, it's disappointing we can't get to PV Boulevard North for next year. Having the plan to get it done in 2026 is great, and I hope that everything kind of comes into line. But for me, what would be really tragic is be sitting here next year with a significant tax increase to actually make that happen in the end. So it's effectively the same as not being able to do it if we're looking at not having enough money in our reserves. And so I would really want to see us make sure that we have that money ready to go, so it's not going to have a huge tax implication for our residents.
Thank you. And Counselor Nietzsche?
Thank you, Your Worship. It has me thinking when Brad brought up the point of regarding the affordable housing project or potential of the affordable housing project on that Jackson Pool Sugden area. Based on some knowledge that I have regarding BC housing grants for those affordable housing projects, those infrastructure upgrades that you would require for those types of projects are included or can be included in those grant applications. And so that's why I just wonder it might be better to delay that project and see if we could promote the affordable housing project, in which case that could help to defer some of those sanitary and water upgrades to that road and help to alleviate some of those costs.
Lori, Brad, any comment?
Yeah, so basically the upgrades in Jackson Pool, Sugden kind of get the infrastructure in the area up to the standard to allow that development to go ahead. It kind of terminates at the corner of Sugden and Pool. but it sets up the additional grant application request to when we go and actually develop that portion, to put that infrastructure to service those 7 or 8 lots, plus the lot in behind Norval Arena. So that would be an additional requirement that we would be looking for the housing grants to put that infrastructure in to actually service the lots with roads, water, sanitary, storm, sidewalks, and servicing to the lots. So it's kind of a two-phased approach for that, to have that land developable. So that is kind of the trade-offs there. And, you know, the other one that I'll put forward to PV North Boulevard, we will have a detailed design based upon the conceptuals and kind of the back and forths we've been going on over the last year on amenities, the nature of the parking, all of that kind of stuff. That opinion of probable cost is going to come with a cost estimate. That is that Class A cost for that project. There will inevitably be a probably lengthy discussion on that number. That's going to come with a sticker shock. And council will probably like some time to look at that and say what is wants versus needs, and have that that discussion and debate on that. Because right now we have been talking conceptuals and, you know, let's look at what we'd like to have. That whole perspective can change once you start to look at costs. And that will take some additional time to work that out to where council is comfortable with what we can afford, what's required for the community. So I think I would recommend that we allow some time for that discussion, because that will be a valuable discussion that will help kind of lay some of the foundation for the additional phases of this project. And, you know, we are hyper focused in on PV North, but that discussion is going to really help set the foundation for the various phases that come from that. So that's kind of an important one that I want to make sure that council understands, that that's going to be probably a difficult conversation, but it will really help shed light on the overall cost of infrastructure upgrades for the downtown and the Cary project, and help set priorities. So keep that in the back of your mind.
Terry?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to respond to Councillor Drapola's comment about uncertainties and contingencies, from a purely financial point of view, the only way that we would have sufficient funding for those kind of contingencies for construction of PV in 2026 is to defer the Sugden project and have the 2 years worth of infrastructure funding, retaining the Growing Communities Fund intact. Again, I don't want to use the word guarantee, but there would be a higher, in my opinion, probability of affordability for PV to be actually constructed in 2026 with those contingencies. But again, we don't know what kind of costs. I mean, if it's anywhere between 2.5 and 5 million, that's a huge swing. So if you're looking at a safety net, I think from a financial point of view, the only way to make that work is to delay Sugden.
Councillor Fowler? Okay, Councillor Drapola?
Yeah, just to follow up, thank you. Yeah, and I really think that having that safety net's important, because if we come and we have these discussions about the project and we don't have those funds and we end up at a spot where we're just repaving the road, like what did we do all of this for? And so we put all this effort and community kind of angst in these discussions, like we better be able to pull something off at the end of this, instead of just being like, well, that was nice, but we can't afford it, so let's just pave it over, right?
Councillor Fowler?
Thank you. 100% agreed. I absolutely, I'm sorry for the people that live on Sugden and Pool and whatever. But this is a priority to me, and what you just mentioned, Brad, about having to sit down and have a hard discussion. These are the things we need to do so that we don't end up getting there, putting this off for a year, and 2020 into 2025, when we're talking about what's going to happen in 2026, we do not want to hear that we can't do it. So we just gotta have those discussions and get them over with. And if, I mean, I'm not speaking for everybody. I'm kind of a little focused on TV. Is it okay if we change the topic?
Lori, you want to weigh in?
Could I just add one small piece too, is my understanding is from the geotechnical, just repaving isn't really an option for PV anymore. So that's something else that we need to keep in mind, that no matter what happens, it's gonna be a big project because we have to remove those organics or the road's just gonna continue to fail. So just keep that in mind.
Councillor Valstar, you're still on this topic? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple. So, Jackson Pool Sugden is over $3 million. Does this cost so much because we're preparing for development? Are we paying a premium here and putting a lot of extra dollars into this for future taxpayers who are not here yet?
Not necessarily. We are taking a look at it as doing the revitalization we've recently completed upgrades on Sage. And some of those upgrades do come down from Sage to Warner. And they terminate halfway down Warner. So we're looking at picking up that infrastructure and bringing it down to tie into the line to the sanitary lagoons and the treatment plant. And then just upgrading and replacing the aging water infrastructure and storm, repaving the road. Right now, we have provisions for sidewalks to be added at future dates. So we are keeping this on a conservative revitalization. Just it's expensive to update aging infrastructure, and that's the same challenges we're going to face as we look at Jarvis or Burns or any street in the community that has aging infrastructure. This is kind of going to be an annual discussion point for council on determining those priorities. So, and to Councillor Fowler's comment, there's going to be lots of difficult discussions from, staff's perspective and council's perspective as we hash through priorities and trying to get an understanding. Our hope from staff's perspective is to have a very clear picture for council on where we have the most risk and where we can really get the most bang for our dollars based upon engineering studies, cost estimates, and kind of pulling out some of the emotion of upgrades and requirements that so we can have those discussions and really have a clear roadmap forward saying how can we balance the impact on taxation as well as replacing some of this infrastructure that's amenable for protecting our infrastructure and our ability to deliver services to the community, but also managing that cost to where residents that live here in town can see the value of their taxation, but still have it manageable that they can put gas in their car and afford to live in the community. So it's going to be a long uphill battle and lots of difficult conversations, but we are on that right path and we are well ahead of a lot of other communities just with the work that this council has supported in getting a detailed understanding of that. So I guess my words are the pain that we're feeling right now will get better and we are on the right path. So it's just going to take us some time to do it and get there in a proper fashion rather than rushing it or doing it substandard.
Follow up on that. Yeah, I just because when you were making your comments, you were talking about adding servicing for additional lots and additional lots in behind it, and it's just I see $3 million on here, and I'm sorry I keep going back to like the 30 roads that we still need to handle. And we're spending $3 million on this road, and we're spending $5-something million on PV road. I feel like we're overlooking some pretty important places that people live in this community, and it's not even on the back burner. So,
Yeah, and through to Council Valstar, it is the road is the asphalt is kind of the icing on the cake, but we have to look at all those ingredients underneath as well. And that's kind of the magnitude of it. It's all over our community, and that's where it's going to be a significant challenge to address it, because there is that deferred maintenance. And, you know, it's to the point now, even where stuff that was built up at the golf course is starting to see some of those pressures. And we've got infrastructure, Becker, Patterson, and those that, I'll pick on Becker. The road has challenges. You can see every settlement and movement in it. The infrastructure underneath it is significantly old. It requires updating. It is part of our major trunk at the north end of Becker for our sanitary. There's lots of challenges there, and Becker's a long road. That is going to be a very, very expensive project. And the thing that we have to factor in is we can do our best to try and determine at the best time to do that project, but Mother Nature and, you know, factors outside of our control may determine that for us. You know, we have a significant challenge, and you know, the 15-year capital plan, I think, will help shed some light on that, because right now we are trying to forecast with the best information we have available, recognizing that we're kind of in an ER room triaging. Like, we know we have other risks and requirements, but we're trying to stop the bleeding a little bit and look to, you know, recovery. So
Well,
it's
I
gonna be
look
a
forward to
challenge.
the 15-year plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Your worship, could I just add one more thing? You know, we talk about not wanting to spend too much for anticipation of future development, but we also have just adopted a zoning bylaw that will allow 4 units on almost every parcel in the whole community. And we're seeing lots of inquiries and lots of applications for carriage houses and secondary suites. And, oh, I don't just have to put a house, I can put a duplex, or I can put a second house. So I think we do have to keep in mind that even without creating new lots and having, you know, big developments come in, if a whole bunch of people on their own current lots are doubling or tripling the load, it has a significant impact, and we do need to be ready for that.
If we're gonna have to start having difficult conversations, we might as well start having them tonight. That, I think that I agree with, if I understood Councilor Drapala, that deferring the Poole, Sugden, Jackson makes perfect sense to me. Then we know we'll have, well, at least we'll have a better idea that we'll have the money towards the end of the year for the next project. And we won't have to explain to people why we're doing a block and a half over there when we should be doing that. We can explain that's why we're not doing that, because we have the money to do that. So, and I realize that it's only gonna get busier, and there's only gonna be more people here, and we're gonna have to figure out how we're gonna do it all. But those worries are down the road. So I think this is our biggest concern, is this one tonight.
Thank you. Maybe my beard's making me old and grumpy. I've been a big advocate of database decision-making since I got onto council, and we've done lots of studies to grab all this information. Is this 15-year capital plan our last piece? Like, is this the final piece to the puzzle where we can finally pull everything together? I just see the price tag of $30,000 for another plan. And I feel like we've probably done, I don't know, 6 or 7 since I've been on council, with not a lot of work, but collecting lots of information. So I'm really looking forward to actually being able to implement some of this stuff for all the data we've been collecting before our data gets too old that we collected in the first place.
Yeah, Councilor Drappi, you're bang on with that one. Like a lot of communities do, they initiate studies and they get a nice fancy document that gets bound up and has a lot of great information in it, and it has a stack of recommendations, but it's siloed. And, you know, you have a bookshelf or a desk with a stack of them on, but you don't have a clear picture of what does all of this mean? And when you put them all together on a table and go, okay, water says we have requirements and recommendations A, B, C, and D. Sanitary has that. where do they overlap? Where are those synergies? And so this is basically removing the silo and getting that clear picture across all of our services to say, this street checks 12 of the 14 boxes and ranks at this score, and here's cost. Where another one, you know, that someone says, hey, my road hasn't been touched, or, you know, my sanitary system doesn't work right, but it only scores a 6. It helps council understand that priority with all of the studies. Well, they are relevant, and we've invested a significant amount of money to the extent that the other initiative that we're working on with the what's it called again? Complete Communities has garnered a lot of attention, because we are one of the few communities that have gathered all this information, and that project, they're going like, we don't see this anywhere else. So we're at a really good place to have that clear picture, and the Complete Communities will give us that, not only that baseline information to go with the 15-year capital plan, but it maps it out that that's something on our webpage. It's you know, we can communicate that to the public, and we're actually actioning that investment of all those reports. So we're on the right track.
Just one little follow-up. So this is the last plan that we'll need for a while? Or is there something else on the horizon that you see, like after we do this, we're like, oh, here's another piece that we need?
The truck route is one. So that is a key component in there, because that will have a significant impact. The other one with the plans that we've done, they're not just a one and done. You know, these plans have a shelf life, and, you know, staff and councils are encouraged to go back and revisit those for a quick review, whether it's every 5 years, whatever frequency, just to say, what have we removed from that list, and has circumstances changed? So, you know, these are living documents, and, you know, I don't foresee huge studies being required, but it's that maintenance of those studies. That, are we checking off those initiatives? Are they still relevant? Because let's face it, we are looking at 15-year capital plan, which really could probably be 25-year. If you were to say, is this deliverable? Can we afford it? It's like refinancing your mortgage from a 25-year term to a 30-year term. That's kind of, I think, the scenario we're looking at to try and tackle these infrastructures. So we will need to maintain those documents, and that will be for council of the day to review and say, you know, we've identified our roadmap is this. Are we still on that, or do we need to adjust from there? So that's kind of the good news of it. We've got a lot of background data. We just have to compile it and implement it.
Thanks, Brad. Do you feel beat up yet?
This is nothing.
I just wanted to say a couple of things. One is that our downtown revitalization isn't because there's potential of rail trail people coming from all over the world to do our trails and our rails and so on and so forth. But it has been mentioned that there could be potential money available to help us get to that finish line. Bringing the rail trail into town is an economic development for our community. So I have heard that, you know, this possibility that's there. There's no guarantees. The other thing is, I was just sitting here thinking about taxpayers, and our taxes keep going up 7, 8, 9%, whatever they do. And this PV road isn't, or the downtown revite isn't just a fun, pretty thing to do. It's something that needs to be done as well. And I think when people see our taxes go up, they can't see what they're paying for. They flush the toilet, they turn on the water, they do all that stuff, but they don't see that when they have to fork out the extra money. If we can get to the point where we can make downtown a little nicer and have a gathering place for people in the evenings and have a more vibrant downtown, I think it'd be a little easier to have the increases from time to time. So that was just one thing I wanted to say. So I don't know if we're done with roads yet. No.
Councillor Nietzsche.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just circling back to Jackson Pool Sugden again, and its relation to the potential for affordable housing as well as additional housing in that area. I'm just wondering if the Housing Accelerator Fund grant program is an option for this project. As I know that they will cover infrastructure and required infrastructure to support additional housing in that area. So that's one question for staff. And then the second one is related to the PV North, and that is the MOTI Active Transportation Grant Program, and making application to augment that project by connecting the rail trail project and developing the active transportation route through the community, through that development area, so that would all be done at the same time and augment that project. So just thoughts from staff on that issue.
If I may, Your Worship. So definitely for the Housing Accelerator Fund, we did include Jackson Pool and Sugden in our application because that really unlocks the potential for that affordable housing development in that segment, as well as kind of building up our general capacity, because that's a bit of a pinch point there. The other piece is, yes, we will be looking at other grant opportunities, the active transportation grant. There's also an implementation round of the funding that we got for the downtown revite strategy in the first place. We've been wanting to finish up some of the projects that we've been underway and get that money spent and demonstrate to the funders that we have the ability to do that and to follow through. And then we'll be making application on some of these as well.
I wanted to just say a little bit differently, going along with what Councillor Todd had said about the public wanting PV North fixed. That was it. Then we sort of got taken down this path of how we could do this revitalization project and make it more welcoming and do all these things that, you know, certainly really look good on paper, but are they affordable? And we need to ask that. And with other grant funding coming into place, if that happens and comes to reality, then maybe we can look at upgrades. But my thing is to fix PV Road North, period. That is the welcome into our downtown core. And that's my priority. When we can afford to do other things, that's great. That is the priority to get fixed. And Councillor Fowler would like a new topic now.
There were some other things in this budget presentation. I thought maybe we could just address a couple of them. City Hall landscaping, I know that was only a $20,000 item on the budget. However, I'm wondering, does that include the benches and the Sons of Scotland commitment that we have for the plaque and the benches for them? Does that include the furniture?
Yeah, for Councillor Fowler, we do have the Sons of Scotland plaque and bench already in place. It just will be installed in 2026 or 2025. It's at the shop and ready to go. We just didn't have the opportunity. The landscaping for the back is basically just providing a cover for the areas in the back. We have trees back there, the extension of the irrigation, some topsoil, and then some additional site furnishings. So it won't be the full build out, but it will be in addition to it. And then as demand in the future dictates, we can add additional components to it, but it's a staged.
My question's about the grants and aid. I'm obviously mistaken, but I thought we weren't having the same groups coming back year after year. And we were just going to continue to throw money at the same groups. I thought perhaps we were going to get different groups in, and I imagine if they don't follow the criteria, they're not going to get in. But I see the same names every year for the last 3 years on that I've been here. So I was just wondering if that was, perhaps I misunderstood or.
Those were the only applications received. I don't recall seeing in the policy that there was a restriction for repeat recipients. Maybe I read it wrong, but I don't recall seeing that.
I don't know that, I do recall what you're saying, Councillor Todd, and I don't know that it ever made forward to a change in policy. Maybe it went to a staff level and has just not gotten around to that, but I do recall that conversation.
Another topic. Sorry, Brad. At our last council meeting, we were talking about the operations, the winter operations. And it was mentioned that from Friday night until Sunday morning, we only have one person on duty. Is that correct?
That is correct. On weekends, we do have a rotational on-call requirement for a staff member, and they are the response. We can look to call in additional resources, but they are not guaranteed. We just have that one staff member that is guaranteed that responds to call outs and snow events.
Okay, I think you just answered my question then, because I believe there was not much snow last year. It might have been the year before. There was a couple of times on weekends when it seemed like the sidewalks weren't done. And then there was the aha moment last council meeting when you mentioned that it wouldn't be done. What would be the threshold for calling somebody in on a weekend to get the sidewalks done? I know it's centimeters or something, but
It's centimeters and it's available resources. The priority is the R1 and R2 routes, which the additional staff members would be called in if that on-call person is unable to keep up with the requirements for plowing R1 and R2. The likelihood of having sidewalks plowed in a major event on a weekend are, with our staffing contingent and equipment contingent, would be unlikely if we are in that big of a snow event.
so just following up on that, I don't know how long it takes. I understand that we're restricted with the staff, but the sidewalks like Rosedale and going down Pleasant Valley along the schools and stuff. If there was a big snowfall, is there an opportunity? I know that you had mentioned when there's a snowfall, everybody's working at once. However, our fellows, our employees get called out on overtime. And I mean, I don't know how willing they are, but is that something that would happen if we got 4 or 5 inches of snow?
Yeah, if we did have that, a significant threshold that the on-call staff member could not basically deal with the priority routes, we would then make a call in for additional resources. But again, that isn't a guaranteed. If there's a staff member available, they have that ability to come in on overtime, but by no means are they required.
I think we're talking about apples and oranges here because Brad's talking about clearing the streets for street traffic and Councillor Fowler's talking about pedestrian traffic on the sidewalks, which is not a priority as I understand it. Is that correct?
Within the current snow clearing policy, it's after R1 and R2 routes. So with that being said, our snow clearing policy is one that is due for an update, not only from the liability perspective, but changes in the community. And that is one that I'd like to start working on for the 2024, 2025 winter. There will be some significant changes to that policy that will have public input and conversation. But that is something I would like to see us start looking at for our work plan for next year, to look at a potential change for the 2025-2026 winter. With growth in the community, density, the layout of some of our roads and some of the liability issues, we do need to change our practices, and a lot of communities are going through this exercise right now. And as you can appreciate, that will be one that will definitely generate public feedback.
Thank you, Brad. I do believe that it doesn't hurt to have a review. That's not another study though. That's just a review, right? Review of the policy. And don't even have to answer that
Yeah,
as big as.
But the big one is a review of policy and an evaluation of service level. And I think that's kind of that discussion that you would like to see, Councillor Fowler, is there a need for a service level adjustment to have the resources and equipment available to have sidewalks plowed on the weekend? Because we are promoting active transportation in the community and a walkable community. With that comes a service level evaluation. Does the cost to provide that service level justify the end result for the community? So that is a conversation that needs to be had, you know, not for this budget cycle, but I would say definitely for the 2026 budget cycle, that it would be nice to have an understanding of those costs, and council then can desire whether they would like to see that service level increase and make decisions there as we incorporate that into kind of the operational impacts.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. I also wanted to ask about is it 4 million for the water reservoir that was in the budget? 4 million? So that wouldn't all lay on our shoulders, but we have it in the budget as being our cost at this point.
The 4 million for the reservoir is all of our cost at this point, yes. That does not include funding from the township. That has to be determined yet. So that cost could come down, like the net cost could come down from that.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
And the same would be said on the water line twinning. SPAL would have a contribution to that project as well.
Could I ask a question on the twinning? What exactly is that?
So that is the replacement of our current 12-inch water line that serves the community from the reservoir down to Rosedale East. It is putting in a 20-inch line to handle that increased capacity to get water into town, and having a secondary line to service the residents or the customers that are serviced off of that line coming into town. There's approximately 31 or so customers that we have outside of our municipal boundaries. So that twins that line for that. This is, I'll use Calgary as an example. Everyone kind of saw the challenges they went through. This project is to ensure that we don't make the headlines for that type of scenario. This project was identified in 2011 and we're past due on it. So this will tie the reservoir and ensuring that we have that updated infrastructure to keep our water flowing to town in a reasonable manner.
So it's a physical twinning, 2 pipes side by side?
Yep, one pipe deeper and another one just offset a little bit higher, smaller diameter.
All right, looking for any further questions regarding the budget at this time? Councilor Drapla.
Sure. Next topic. I think overall, the 5.8% increase feels high to me. And I have heard all the good justifications of why we need to spend lots of that money. You add that proposed 0.33%, that takes us up over 6% increase overall. Where are some things that we could look if we wanted to reduce that? So I know that not all of the items on there have an impact to that percent. Some of it's reserves, some of it's grant money. But are there some of those other things that we could maybe defer? So like tot lot, is that $100,000 referral of a tot lot? Does that decrease our overall tax impact to the community? Or are there some other highlights that we could look at and weigh pros and cons here?
There are several projects in 2025 that are earmarked to be tax funded. So the tot lot for 100,000 is one. City Hall landscaping 20,000 is another. The storm drainage CCTV and condition assessment for 67,500 is also tax funded, as is the culvert replacement for 30,000. That's tax funded. So there are 4 projects that all add up to 217,500 that are tax funded. So if council chose to defer one or more of those projects, that could have an impact on lowering the tax rate.
Just to follow up to that, and what's the rough dollar value then to the overall tax impact for 1%?
A 1% tax increase provides around 27,000 in revenue.
Ms. Cordell?
Thing wasn't on. My apologies, my microphone wasn't on. Counselor Nietzsche, you didn't hear that. Is that we might have a funding partnership that could help offset some of the costs. I think they were talking about up to 40,000 with a local community group. But they would need to expend their funding in next year. So if we delay it, they wouldn't be able to be a partner in the project.
Sorry, I didn't hear the start of that, Lori. Was that just related to the tot lot project?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, it is.
I'm just going to throw this out there. There's a potential partial funder for the finishing up the city landscaping as well. Furniture type stuff. So I can get back to staff in a week or so.
So how do we budget for those potential things, right? If we're gonna say, well, we can't bank on potential funding until it's a sure thing, then we're raising those taxes anyway, regardless. Yes? No?
It's tricky to budget speculatively. Professionally, I don't recommend that. By deferring a project and then coming back to council partway through the year for a budget amendment request saying we have funding from this source or help from this source, perhaps we can use prior year surplus for the rest because it's a one-time project. I would recommend that instead, rather than budgeting for a speculative funding source we don't know is there.
Councillor Nietzsche?
I think this is the conversation we need to have regarding prioritization on both the capital and the operating side. I think, Terry, you just gave us some pretty good options there. I think the only way you bring those capital costs down is either to use surplus or to use reserve funding. I think the tot lot certainly fits into the Parks and Recreation Reserve. Terry, can you tell us how much money is sitting in that Parks and Recreation Reserve?
I can. Just 1 second. And while I'm looking that up, the sole funding source for that reserve is the annual parcel tax.
Parcel
that is
tax.
charged to residents. That goes into that reserve. 1 moment.
While he's looking that up, can I just mention something? That we don't have to decide on the tax implications yet for at least another couple of months, 3 months. And I know that I'll be able to get an answer within a month. And maybe the other funding partner will have a decision by then as well.
I think that's a good point, Councillor Fowler. I think what we're talking about here right now is the just general direction to staff on how we want them to work towards, finalizing the budget. But I think it's good now to have that conversation about what our expectations are so that they can try to meet those types of targets. I'll be quite honest with you. I'm not as concerned about doing additional landscaping work at City Hall. I think that it looks fantastic the way it is, and I think that's a nice to have and not a need to have, in my opinion. And if it's going to save 1% on the overall taxation, I would be more than happy to cut that from the project. I'd also be supportive of using reserve or surplus funding to support the tot lot, but I don't want to see us cut that. That has been on the books since like the late '90s to try to do something there. And if anybody's been up there, it's a mess and it needs to be corrected. And and on the operating side, just to give some direction, I'm supportive of us hiring students to do the landscaping work, but I would like that to be subject to having grant funding in place from one of the sponsors. That's just my 2 cents.
So in response to your question, Councillor Nietzsche, about the Parks and Rec Reserve, there is ample amount of money in that reserve. If council chose to fund the tot lot completely from that reserve, we would have enough. My understanding from that reserve from years ago is the original intent was for the joint Parks and Recreation unforeseen major repair requirements for the facilities on the fairgrounds. That's what triggered this reserve to be established in the first place. So I don't know if that has morphed into something else, but I'm just providing some background information there. It's totally up to council how they want to use that money. So if you wanted to use it for tot lots, that's completely up to you. I think it's reasonable. The balance as of the end of 2024 available is 355,000. Yes.
Okay. If I could, Your Worship, just to respond to that, because it was my question. Terry, that you're bang on. That's exactly what the fund was created for. Basically, in the the early 2000s, the sky was falling on the fairgrounds particularly, and we had significant challenges there with buildings and a lot of our parks and recreation infrastructure. And council had to come up with a creative way of creating some sort of a fair tax so that we could start building, which was essentially an asset management plan back in the early 2000s. So the fact that it's accumulated to the way it is right now is good news. It was probably underfunded back then and likely is underfunded now, given some of the financial liabilities that we have down there. But I think that this type of a project is exactly what it was created for, and that was to address parks and recreation issues in the community. And so I certainly would support that.
Dropla.
Thank you, Worship. I agree with Councillor Nietzsche in terms of not moving forward with City Hall landscaping and also using the reserve for tot lot.
Anybody else? I think that's a great recommendation.
Yeah, I agree with everybody. I agree with both the gentlemen. I think that's City Hall looks wonderful. And I think it will continue to look wonderful. I'll come and mow it, I don't even live with it. I'll just bring my mower down.
Sorry, just one follow-up too. I also agree with the summer students contingent on grant funding.
Sorry, Councillor Dropla, that you support that.
Yes, I support only moving forward with the summer students contingent on getting grants.
Why don't we try to knock an easy one off the table? And we do have a motion that a change request not included in the proposed 2025-2029 financial plan for a reallocation of a contracted boulevard landscaping to summer student labor at an incremental cost of $9,300 to be funded by an additional 0.33% tax increase be approved. Can we have a mover?
Could we amend that to only be approved contingent on receiving grant funding? Or
Yeah, I'd move that for sure.
Well, I just wanted to point out that that would be worst case scenario without grant funding. It's a very, very small amendment to the tax increase, and we would be employing local students or local people and getting much more value out of it in terms of hours versus contracted hours. So if that doesn't excite anybody, then I guess, Councilor Nietzsche, do you have your hand up?
No. Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. This is difficult to talk about in an open meeting because it has union implications, but there is some history related to moving away from contracted models and moving towards in-house unionized labor to complete landscaping works. And I think that issue should be deferred in camera so that we can discuss that issue.
Okay, seeing as there was no seconder, then there's now a motion to defer item 3 regarding the hiring of students. Can we have a mover on that? To defer it? Councillor Valstar, second by Councillor Fowler. Okay. Okay, so it'll be moved to an in-camera discussion as opposed to deferred. Still good, Councillor Valstar? Good, Councillor Fowler, thank you. Any further question? Call the vote. All those in favor? And that will be passed. Thank you. Looking back at the grant in aids portion of our budget, number 2 on our agenda, that the 2025 grant in aids to nonprofit organizations as included in the proposed 2025 to 2029 financial plan be specifically awarded in the amounts following. We've reviewed that. Do we have a mover on that motion? Moved by Councillor Drapala, seconded by Councillor Wayner. Was there any further discussion there? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor? That portion will be carried. And going back to the budget, we're going to refer this back to staff at this time to look at making some changes to the way we fund both the Tots Park and the landscape or lack thereof to complete City Hall. Was there anything else on that that we wanted to have a look at? Councillor Drapala?
Are we going to include the deferral of Poole and Sugden within that plan?
Councillor Todd?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
okay.
That was the plan, I thought.
Well, that is that money that needs to be agreed to wholeheartedly to be used only for that purpose, or during the budget, can we change that, move that around so that it could be applied to PV? I'll ask Terry.
I would recommend that you earmark the specific projects in this budget and not leave it open. Yeah, basically what I think I'm hearing is tabling Sugden and not having it in the 5-year budget at all at this point, and saving for 2 years for PV Boulevard to allow for contingencies.
All right, so we are in agreement with that then. So we will table the Sugden project, allow those funds to be available if required to move forward with PV and readdress that issue down the road. Councillor Drapala?
And I imagine that as a consequence to doing that, there'll be some other line item that comes in for Sugden to the work that needs to be done there, right? That whatever mediation work Brad was talking about.
Yeah, I'll just put forward if the project is deferred, staff would go back and look at the costs to deal with the open point excavation with the sanitary line it's a category 4, category 5 defect that does require attention. So we would have to look at putting some money aside to be able to action that as a temporary measure to buy us additional time.
Any ideas how much that might be? Ballpark?
We did have a collection improvement budget of $100,000, which I have deferred from this year's. I would make the recommendation that we have that collection improvements budget of 100,000 incorporated into the 2025 budget to be able to address the excavation on Jackson.
Okay, so we did put a whole lot on that motion. Philip, were you able to capture most of it? Okay. So regarding subject one, will we just send that back to staff then to work on it and bring us back with the changes that we've asked for? Is that right?
Terry, did you want a motion or are you good?
I think direction to staff to come back on December 16th for the regular meeting on the 16th with a kind of a revised plan. I'm a little bit confused though about, I hear that the desire is to remove the landscaping project completely, but to fund the tot lot from reserve. Is that the direction? Okay.
Councillor
Okay.
Wayner?
Yeah, just a question about using the funds. But in my mind, I'm seeing a tot lot where we're adding something, whereas the funds for the reserve is intended to replace or repair something. Just in my mind, I have a big cautionary flag going off about trying to raise more funds to replace something, or is instead now we're adding an asset, so to speak. So I'm having a hard time justifying using reserves that were intended to replace to enhance our services. So
Councillor Nietzsche?
Yeah, just for clarification for Councillor Wayner, that was not what the intention of it was to replace. It was to rebuild or replace. It was basically to have a discretionary fund or a reserve fund to use for parks and recreation purposes. It's been used for new construction in the past as well. So this wouldn't be foreign, and I don't think there's any conditions set on the reserve either. And Terry can confirm that. But from my recollection, council can use these funds as they see fit, as long as they're being used for parks and recreation purposes.
Just to clarify, the fund has received incoming funding from surpluses from the joint Parks and Rec service as well. Not just our parcel tax, but past surpluses from that have gone there. So that's why it's high as what it is. So just clarification there. So it will likely increase again, depending on what kind of surplus we're going to see from Parks and Rec, from Canland at the end of the year, probably.
Thank you. I do see this as actually a replacement. Like there's a tot lot there now. We're not creating a new tot lot. We're just improving the piece that's fallen apart.
there's not much there. I'm sorry.
All right, so the direction is then to take item one back to staff and re-present on the December 16th meeting. Council's all good with that? Councilor Feller?
Yeah, there's been so many kind of gives and takes and ups and downs and thoughts going on. I really like the idea of coming back on the 16th. There's also the piece that there's potentially a funding partner to do some of that, which means it wouldn't all come out of that reserve if it did happen. But yeah, I think we really need to have a second sober thought on a whole bunch of things we talked about tonight. So I'd much rather not make any motions to commit ourselves.
And Terry, just with the changes that we've provided or the direction we've provided with the tot lot and with the city hall landscaping, what percentage are we going to see in an overall tax saving approximately?
That was the question I was going to ask. Was the proposed tax increase for the general levy is only sitting at 2% right now. So if we're saving all of this money, then it's actually going to be a tax reduction or potentially a zero tax increase for the general and bumping up the other ones. So I'm looking for some direction on where council would like to land on an overall tax increase, and then I can come up with maybe various options on the structure for the tax levies.
I'm going to ask Councilor Drapla to come on that. You're the one that decided that we weren't happy, or you would like to find a new alternative. So what do you think?
Fair enough. Well, I guess in a perfect world, I would like to see an overall impact as low as possible, right? But knowing that we're not going to hit a 2% target overall. I would see a reduction of 2%, 1% would be, I think, I don't know, more in my comfort level. I just think being able to know that we took a really hard look at the budget and made some reductions at a time when lots of households and families in town are struggling with the cost of everything, right? And so I know it's only $6 a month, but everything adds up, and this is just one of those things for families. So I would want to see as much reduction as possible, but understanding we're not going to get down to a 2% overall. And so however we want to justify that in the end, if that means moving our general taxation down to 0 or a negative to lower that impact, then it is what it is. I'm more concerned with that 5.8 overall number.
You know, it's just the general levy is at 2%, but the others are higher for the net effect of 5.8. So if council would like, I could come up with a few models, a few options of perhaps using some of the savings from what we're talking about here to bolster the police levy and bring that up a little bit more instead. So
Actually, I think you sold me on our initial discussion on the budget using the police levy as an example. And if you would have the opportunity to explain that to the rest of council, I think that might aid in our forecast.
currently, with the way we're using police reserve monies to help pay for policing, as you could see from that reserve schedule, by year 5, we're down to only 130 some thousand in the reserve. That police reserve is multifaceted. The purpose of it is to fund unforeseen investigations that could be extremely expensive and not included in our contract. Also, it is used or can be used for retro pay. Now that the RCMP members are unionized, there are those situations where retro pay is necessary, and we may not have the budget necessary for that, so that reserve comes in handy for that. My recommended ceiling for that reserve for those purposes would actually be $750,000, $750,000. But if we keep going the way we are, we're going to drain it. So that's why I am suggesting a $35,000 flat increase every year in the police levy so that we can stop the bleeding, per se, and start building that reserve up again to where I think it should be. So that was my the reason why I suggested, if we have room to play with, that we could, accelerate increasing that levy. And potentially we could accelerate the infrastructure levy too, if council wanted to. So there's a few options here that we could do. But remember that what we do in 2025, we would likely have to carry on. So having a one-time reduction in 2025, but then have a huge increase in 26 isn't sustainable either, both politically and financially. So there's a lot of things we have to look at for tax structure. So if council would like a few different options, I can come up with a few for the 16th, or if you want to land on one right now, we could do that.
Sounds like council would like to see options. I don't like the thought of tax increases either, but I think that you did a really good job of keeping to it, having it very minimalistic at a cost of less than $7 a month to the average household in Armstrong. I think that's a remarkable job to see the services we're getting are being provided as such. And as long as they stay as low as they are, I'm relatively comfortable in supporting them. That's just my position. I don't think it's out of characteristic. And I see other municipalities around us doing 11% tax increases. The city of Vernon just approved or tentatively approved and stuff like that. I think coming in where our staff have brought this budget is a really good job on their part.
I just like to echo the mayor's response there. I'm not a big fan of tax increases either, but it's 20 cents a day. It seems, incredibly reasonable compared to our neighbors. It's higher obviously for businesses. It's about 75 cents a day for everybody, but if we can get it lower, that'd be great, but I don't find it onerous particularly.
And in order to get it lower, we're begging from Peter to pay Paul. So I don't know that there's any advantage to that. Just looking at Councillor Nietzsche to see if he had some words of wisdom for us.
No, I think that staff done a great job preparing this draft, and I think that I trust that staff are going to be respectful of the fact that we have to be mindful of incremental increases while at the same time ensuring that our community is going to be sustainable in terms of our financial outlook. I would agree. I'd like to see some options now, based on some of the direction that we've given to staff to just come back with what those tax increases would look like. I think we also have to be mindful of the fact that council has made some pretty tough decisions over the last 2 years related to the new infrastructure levies, and that has placed a bit of a burden on our community. So I think we have to be mindful of that as well. So let's balance all of the interests, both the long-term interests of the corporation and the community, as well as also thinking about residents' pocketbooks as well, and be mindful of that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of options they can come up with based on the direction that we're providing tonight.
And so I agree. I know staff put a ton of work into this and I really appreciate it. Is it too onerous in looking at the options to kind of do a rough forecasting out what the tax increases would be the year after? Like I look at the water rates increasing as well. And so the kind of what the mayor was saying is, as we're deferring, what kind of jumps do we see in those options for future years as well? If it's not too onerous. If it is, then it's fine.
I think we could do that for 2026, but when you start looking beyond that, it gets very guessy and it's probably not useful. But for 2026, I probably could come up with an estimate.
That would be great. Thank you.
When I was talking about the taxes, I forgot all about the water, and that, that's a big jump we're looking at over the next 3 years. And after that 3-year jump, are we looking at a continual raise on that, or is that that'll be a plateau and we'll be able to stay at that level?
That would be correct, unless there's unforeseen issues. But going forward on a year-by-year basis, once we hit the year 2027, the full debt servicing for the entire 30 years of the 2 loans that we would be getting would be completely built in to the rate structure. So it wouldn't need to go up anymore because of debt servicing. The only time it would is if the MFA would refinance the loans. Every 10 years, they refinance the loans. And if the interest rate ends up being higher, we have to pay more for the following 10 years. But I don't think it would be a huge impact.
Brad, please.
So just on the waterfront, you do see in the 5-year capital plan filtration requirements for our water treatment plant. That is something that has been on the radar for a number of years. Our water treatment plant upgrades were designed to the point where we didn't require filtration under our current arrangement. We did meet with our senior drinking water protection officer last week, toured our facilities. That is still an item that is of high importance to him, and we did discuss that at length. He is happy with the direction we have been taking with the investments in the water modeling and the improvements that we're doing, but this is still very much on his radar. So I would anticipate we will have this requirement in the future. He's very understanding and workable of the cost implications, but at some point this could just become a drinking water order. So that is something else as we kind of finish this first phase of our water infrastructure upgrades. We will have to focus our attention on a plan moving forward to be able to address that when the time comes. and hopefully not in the order of a drinking water order. So.
All right, was there any, Counselor Fowler?
Just something that came to mind. Have we anything in our forward plans to discuss or deal with the old City Hall property? I don't need an answer. Even a yes or a no would be okay.
Thank you for that question, Counselor Fowler. We are looking to move forward with selling the property at some point, which will generate some income for some things. But we've been waiting for the official community plan to be adopted because that has a new land use designation for that property. And then once that's adopted, we can change the zoning in alignment with it. And then that'll make it eminently more sellable. I had anticipated the zoning would be adopted by now, and it's taken a bit longer than expected to get to this place. We're getting near the finish line now. If we decided it was more urgent, we could bring forward an amendment, but I think at this point, we're getting so close.
And we do have a tenant that we need to be concerned with before we really move forward with anything. All right, seeing nothing further, I'll ask for the last opportunity to speak tonight on the budget. We appreciate all of staff's time, effort. Terry, I know we just created a whole lot more work for you, but we're looking forward to your presentation on the 16th. And on that note, I'd like to have a motion to adjourn. All those in favor? This meeting is in adjournment. Thanks, everybody.